The first thing I heard was bass rattling through the night air, music so loud it shook the glass panes of my lake house. My lake house. The home I had fought for, saved for, dreamed of. I parked at the edge of the gravel driveway, confused, because I hadn't told a soul I was coming. Every window glowed. Shadows of people moved through the rooms as though they owned the place. I hurried to the front door, my hands trembling as I dug for my keys. The familiar silver teeth slid into the lock, but the cylinder wouldn't turn. It felt stuck, almost as if another key was already sitting inside from the other side. I knocked, once, then harder. Laughter spilled out between the cracks of the doorframe, laughter that didn't belong here. Finally, the door opened. Sarah stood there, her makeup smudged and a glass dangling from her hand. She gave me that smile, the one that always felt more like a sneer. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice syrupy sweet, the kind she used when she wanted to cut deepest. Behind her, I caught glimpses of uncles, cousins, people I hadn't invited in years, sprawled across my furniture with bottles in their hands. "This is my house," I managed, my throat tightening. Cirrus leaned against the frame, tilting her head with mock pity. "No room left. Maybe you should sleep in your car." And with that, she slammed the door in my face. I stood there for a long time, the night pressing heavy on my chest, the bass from inside thudding through my bones. My key dangled useless in my hand. My sanctuary, the place I had worked myself raw to buy, was no longer mine, not in that moment. I walked back to my car and sat behind the wheel, the glass fogging with each breath, the laughter from inside carried out into the night, and I realized something had broken, something I couldn't ignore anymore. It hadn't started tonight. It had been building for years, hidden beneath bills paid, favors granted, and silence I never should have kept. It hadn't always been this way. There was a time when every dollar I earned clung to me like a lifeline, stretched thin across rent, groceries, and the endless tide of student loans. I lived on packets of ramen, cut coupons until the paper smudged my fingers, and wore thrift shop clothes until the seams split. Nights blurred into mornings as I hunched over my computer, teaching myself new coding languages by lamplight, too tired to notice the ache in my wrists or the burn in my eyes. When I finally landed a stable position, the hours were merciless. 60-hour weeks, weekends spent debugging code no one else wanted to touch. But little by little, I clawed my way into something steadier. The first time I bought groceries without checking my balance 3 times, I cried in the parking lot, clutching bags of food like they were gold. My first apartment came soon after a modest 2-bedroom with thin walls and cracked tile. But it was mine. I could paint the kitchen yellow if I wanted to. I could invite friends without cringing at peeling paint or borrowed furniture. That tiny apartment became the first real taste of freedom. But it wasn't the end. The lake house came 3 years later, after months of pinching every spare dollar. I drove my car until it groaned at every stoplight, skipped vacations, and rotated the same 3 work outfits until the fabric thinned. The day I signed the papers, the agent looked surprised when I slid a check across the desk instead of loan documents. No mortgage, no debt, just pure, unburdened ownership. The house itself was simple 2 bedrooms, a broad deck that overlooked water so clear I could see stones on the bottom, and silence so deep it felt like a balm. Standing there the first time, I thought, this is what peace feels like. I hadn't asked for anyone's help to reach it. I hadn't leaned on anyone's shoulders. Yet, somehow, when my family looked at that house, they saw not sacrifice but spoils, something they believed they had a right to share. I had always told myself that helping my family was what a good daughter did. At first. It was small $50 slipped into my mother's hand when the electric bill ran late. $100 to Orrin when his paycheck didn't stretch far enough. But small gestures grew into obligations, and before I realized it, Nearly every month bled the same way. $800 went to Orrin for rent on his studio apartment. He never managed to hold a job long, but he always managed to hold out his hand. $1,100 went to Sarah so she could keep her one bedroom in the city. She said she needed the space to study for her certification exams, though years later the same books still sat untouched. $400 went to Mireille for groceries and utilities. I didn't even call it help anymore. It was just a line in my budget. As fixed as my own expenses, $2,300 disappeared every month into their lives. I told myself it was family loyalty. I told myself it was duty. And yet, each time I gave, the gratitude faded faster. Soon, it wasn't gratitude at all. When I showed up to dinner with a new bag, a $45 purchase from a clearance rack, Cirrus eyed it like it was made of gold. "Must be nice," she muttered, loud enough for everyone to hear. Some of us are worrying about bills. Orrin wasn't any better. He once spotted a pair of shoes on my feet and whined about eating rice and beans, conveniently forgetting I had just covered his rent after he spent his last paycheck on concert tickets. Even my parents played their part. Gareth said little, but his silence felt like agreement. Mireille soothed the tension with her soft, cutting phrases. "They just wish they had your opportunities." Elowin, opportunities as if luck, not years of sacrifice, had built my life. The weight of their resentment pressed heavier with every dinner, every sideways glance, every mocking comment. And though I swallowed it down, a part of me began to wonder just how far they thought my pockets could stretch. The first time I invited them to see the lake house, I was almost proud enough to forget how sour their words had been when I first told them about it. I wanted, foolishly, for them to share in my excitement. When they pulled up the drive, their faces lit, but not with joy for me. Cirrus walked straight inside and tossed her bag onto the guest bed like she was checking into a hotel. "This one's mine," she announced, her voice edged with triumph. Mireille wandered through the kitchen, touching the countertops, humming about how peaceful it all felt, when she asked for a spare key just in case. I hesitated only a second before handing one over. It seemed harmless family sharing family's space. Gareth muttered something about how quiet it was, and Orrin stretched out on the sofa like he already owned it. At first, things seemed fine. They would text when they wanted to come for the weekend, and I'd let them, when I returned after. The house looked mostly unchanged, an extra towel here, a few dishes in the sink, nothing I couldn't handle. I told myself this was what generosity looked like. But one weekend I drove up unannounced, hoping for solitude after weeks of grueling work. The moment I opened the door, my chest sank. Beer bottles lined the mantel. Pizza boxes stacked high on the counter. The air smelled of smoke and grease. My white couch bore a stain shaped like a careless handprint, and cigarette burns scarred the deck furniture I had saved months to afford when I confronted them later. Cirrus shrugged, unconcerned. "So you can afford to fix it," Orrin agreed, calling it normal wear and tear. Mireille only sighed, patting my arm. "Don't be so dramatic, Elowin." I demanded the key back that night, and Mireille pressed it into my palm with a wounded look, as if I had betrayed her. But as I walked away, clutching the metal tight, I couldn't shake the unease twisting in my stomach. Something told me that Key had already opened more doors than I ever intended. The night I found myself shut out of my own house, everything clicked into place, the lock refusing to turn, the music rattling the windows, the shadows of strangers moving across walls that had once been my refuge. It all pointed to one undeniable truth. They had copied the key. When the door cracked open, I saw more than my immediate family. Aunts I hadn't spoken to in years, cousins I barely recognized, people who had no right to be anywhere near my home. All of them lounged inside, drinks in hand, as if this place had always been theirs. My furniture was their seating, my deck their stage, my sanctuary their playground. I tried to push my way in, but Mireille stepped into the frame. Her face was calm, almost bored. as though this were nothing more than an awkward misunderstanding. "I made a copy before I gave yours back," she said lightly, like she was admitting to borrowing sugar from a neighbor, just in case, as though my property, my effort, my sacrifice were a communal resource waiting to be claimed whenever they felt the urge. Behind her, Saris appeared with that smirk I'd grown to despise. She held a glass in one hand and leaned her weight against the door with satisfaction gleaming in her eyes. "No room left," she said, her voice as sharp as broken glass. "You can sleep in your car." The door slammed, and I stood there in the dark, clutching the useless key in my fist until the edges bit into my palm. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My breath came shallow, my chest ached, and the laughter inside carried out into the night air like a cruel echo of everything I had already endured. I stumbled back to my car and sat behind the wheel, staring through the windshield at the house I no longer felt was mine. The weight of silence pressed down, hot tears stinging at the corners of my eyes. I thought of every bill paid, every rent check covered, every moment I had traded peace for obligation, and as the music throbbed through the walls behind me, a bitter truth settled over me. My silence had never earned me respect. It had only taught them how far they could go, back in my apartment. The silence felt heavy, but it was mine. I dropped my bag on the counter and opened my laptop. For years, the transfers had run automatically lines of money leaving my account without my even thinking about it. Rent for Oren, rent for Saris, utilities for Mireille. I pulled up the scheduled payments, my hand hovering over the keys. Then, one by one, I canceled them. The confirmation screens blinked back at me. Transfer canceled. Automatic payment disabled. For the first time in years. My balance wouldn't drain into their pockets. My money, earned by sleepless nights and endless hours of code, would finally stay where it belonged with me. The next morning, I called the locksmith. By noon, the locks on the lake house were replaced with new cylinders. Every copy they had made rendered useless. The old keys clinked in a paper envelope as the locksmith handed them back. I thought of Mireille's calm voice saying, "just in case," and shoved the envelope into the trash. But I wasn't done. I wanted to make sure there would never be a next time. A security company installed motion sensors, door alarms, cameras that covered every angle of the property. They walked me through the app, showing how each alert would go straight to my phone, watching the live feed of my empty deck. The stillness of my living room, I felt a strange calm return to me. That night, I returned to my apartment, heated a frozen meal, and sat in the dim light of my kitchen. The tears came without warning. My body shook as I gripped the counter, years of exhaustion and disappointment pouring out in sobs that I couldn't hold back anymore. I buried my face in my hands, whispering to no one but myself. No more. The words felt like a promise, even if they were thin and shaky. I wiped my eyes, steadied my breath, and looked again at the security feed glowing from my phone. For the first time, the silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like a beginning, and as I watched the stillness of my lake house on the screen, I had no idea how quickly that promise would be tested. The alert came just past midnight, the sharp buzz of my phone pulling me out of restless sleep. My heart raced as I opened the app. And there it was, my lake house glowing under the pale wash of the motion lights. Figures moved in the yard, 4 of them. I tapped to zoom, my breath catching. Gareth, Mireille, Oren, and Saris, my own family, pacing around the house like burglars. Mireille stood by the front door, her arms crossed. While Saris tugged at the knob, Gareth circled the windows, peering inside as though the home were some vacant prize. Oren picked up one of my patio chairs, his face twisted in frustration. In an instant, he raised it high and drove it against the sliding glass door. The crack of shattering glass echoed through the speakers of my phone. I felt sick, staring at the jagged hole they had forced into the home I had bled myself dry to earn. My thumb hovered only a moment before I pressed the call button. The dispatcher's voice was steady, calm, a lifeline. 911. What's your emergency? There are intruders in my house, I said, my voice shaking. I'm watching them on my cameras right now. It's my family. They're breaking in. She asked for the address, reassured me that units were on their way. I stayed on the line, eyes fixed on the feed as Oren stepped through the broken glass, unlocking the front door from inside. In seconds, all of them flooded in, spreading through my home as if nothing were wrong. Then the red and blue lights cut across the driveway. Officers stormed the porch, weapons at the ready, commands rang out, sharp and undeniable. My family stumbled back into the yard, their hands raised, confusion etched across their faces. One by one, they were cuffed, led to the cruisers, their heads lowered against the flashing lights. I watched it all unfold on the small screen in my hand, my pulse steadying, even as numbness settled deep in my chest. Relief and dread tangled together, leaving me with only one thought: would this be the moment that finally set me free, or the choice that destroyed us forever? The next morning, I walked into the station with my shoulders squared, though inside I was shaking. An officer led me down a narrow hallway and into a small room. The air smelled of coffee gone stale, papers stacked high on the desk. A detective told me my family wanted to speak with me before their release. When the door opened, they filed in, looking nothing like the triumphant crowd I had seen at my house. Mireille's hair was matted, her eyes swollen from crying. Gareth's jaw was tight, his face red with fury he was trying and failing to mask. Oren looked stunned, almost childlike, and Saris's mascara streaked black lines down her cheeks. Elowen. Thank God. Mireille rushed forward, reaching for my hand. I stepped back before she could touch me. This is a mistake, Saris cried. You can't just let them keep us here. We're family. You abandoned me the night you locked me out of my own house, I said, my voice steady, sharper than I'd ever heard it. You made your choice long before I made mine. Oren leaned across the table, desperation in his eyes. Just post bail. We'll talk at home. We can fix this. I'm not paying a cent. I answered. And you should know, the money's gone. Every rent check, every transfer, every dollar I sent you, it's over. You'll have to figure it out yourselves. The silence that followed was suffocating. Gareth's mouth opened as if to speak, but nothing came. Mireille's face drained of color, and Saris's tears stopped as quickly as they had come. The realization hit them all at once. The bank they had drained for years was finally closed. I stood, pushing the chair back gently. My decision final. Their eyes followed me as I turned to the door, their voices caught somewhere between anger and disbelief. I didn't look back as I stepped into the hallway, but I could feel the weight of their silence pressing against my shoulders, heavier than any chains. News traveled fast, even without me speaking a word. Within weeks, Oren and Saris were both evicted, their names plastered on late notices taped to apartment doors, with no rent payments arriving from me. They had nowhere else to go but back to Mireille and Gareth's cramped house. Suddenly, the ones who had mocked my independence were forced to share a childhood bedroom again. Mireille, who once carried herself with an air of practiced authority, started working part-time at a grocery store. Gareth, already worn from years of maintenance shifts, picked up overtime wherever he could. They had lived for so long with the cushion of my money that reality came down on them like a weight they couldn't push off. Through cousins and neighbors, I heard the stories how they told anyone who would listen that I was cruel, that I had turned my back on family, at barbecues and in grocery aisles. The gossip painted me as selfish, cold, ungrateful for the people who raised me. In their version, I was the villain who chose money over blood. My phone lit up constantly with their numbers, then with numbers of relatives I barely knew. I blocked them all. The silence afterward felt startling. like a door shutting on years of noise I hadn't realized was suffocating me. For the first time, my paycheck stayed in my account. I paid my bills and still had money left. Real money that was mine alone. I walked through stores without calculating what I could spare for someone else. I sat on my couch at night, breathing air that belonged only to me. And yet, in that silence, I wondered, was my freedom worth being branded the villain in their story? I returned to the lake house after weeks of keeping away, unsure if the silence would comfort me or remind me of what I'd lost. When I stepped inside, the locks clicked solidly behind me, the security system blinking steady at the door. For the first time, the house felt entirely mine again, untouched, unspoiled, safe. The morning sun stretched across the deck, spilling gold over the water. I carried my coffee outside and sat in the quiet, the kind of quiet that wasn't absence but presence, every ripple of the lake, every breath of wind through the trees reminding me that peace could exist without compromise. I thought about loyalty, the way it had been twisted into something ugly. They called it family love. But what kind of love demanded sacrifice without respect? What kind of love locked me out of my own home and told me to sleep in my car I had given them years of myself? And, in the end, they treated me like a resource, not a daughter or a sister. I breathed deeply, letting the stillness of the lake settle into me. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift, not because I had punished them, but because I had finally chosen myself. I whispered the words into the morning air, firm and unshaken. My house, my life, my rules. In the end, what lasts longer, the house we build or the dignity we refuse to sell? Outline, full story outline. They copied my keys, then slammed the door in my face characters.